The music has stopped, so good morning, good evening, and hello to our session. Shape your mindset to become a lifelong learner. Thanks for joining our panel today, and if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A. If we miss to answer them later or we run out of time, please reach out to us to the Woowa platform. Allison, hello, and thanks for joining me to this session today. May I ask you to introduce you to the audience?
Hi, Birgit. Thank you. My name is Allison McEntire. I am a software developer at Urban Outfitters, and I come to engineering from a background in English literature. I was a community college instructor for more than 10 years, and I'm very excited to share my experiences with lifelong learning, and also to introduce you to my co-panelist, Birgit. Birgit, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for introducing Allison. So my name is Birgit Reiners. I'm currently holding the position as Director of Professional Services Sales within VMware. I do live in Hamburg, Germany. So if you look at the time difference, is 10:45 p.m. in Germany. I'm a mother of an 11-year-old boy, and I have started my professional career already with 17. I do not have a university degree, so lifelong learning is definitely a passion for myself. I still prefer Adidas sneakers versus Nike, and you will learn later on why. I have experience of 17.5 years with Microsoft in various roles with various managers. And just 2.5 years, I got the opportunity to join VMware to give my career another kickstart.
Birgit and I came from two opposite sides of the lifelong learning spectrum. And so when we paired up for this chat, we decided to construct it as a fireside chat. So I'm going to kick it off by asking Birgit some questions. So first, what are some strategies that you use to get the most out of dedicated trainings?
So dedicated trainings are, from my point of view, extremely important, but it's not only the training. It's a combination of your lifetime events, the 70, 20, 10% rule, and the connection between this is extremely important. So looking at lifetime events, what does it mean? We learn while we live, we gain experiences, but we need to understand the connection between the experience and the upcoming situation and use this for us in a very positive way. Quite often we apply the 70, 20, 10% rule only for professional skills. From my experience, I can say a lot of experience to happen outside of your professional life, but you can move this to your role-based situation. So looking at the 70, 20, 10% situation, so the 70% is quite often called on-the-job learning. But nevertheless, the experiences and the challenges you are facing are inside and outside of the job. So sometimes it's called take the extra mile, get involved into a specific project to learn while you are in the situation. But I think it's extremely important to focus also on the 20 and the 10%. So let's take a look on the 20%. It's quite often the learning through others who have maybe done the same way or have some other great insights through mentors, mentees, or best practice sharing. And now comes the point of training. So the 10% will definitely influence on the job training. But what kind of trainings you need is quite often identified in the 20% when you talk to someone else. If you share best practice and you find out this or that specific skill needs to be trained. So this is where you then go into the situation of focusing on a specific training. So learning is something what should happen continuously and is about enhancing and expanding your own skills. And bear in mind, some of the skills you learn today might get obsolete in the future. So some of you might remember this shorthand typing. Nowadays, it's probably irrelevant to 95%, but speech recognition is extremely important. So the mindset of getting things done in a faster way stays. but the way you apply to it is different.
How do you identify some great resources for self-development?
Let me come back to the point of the lifelong learning and the lifetime events I pointed out in this specific area. So this is a snapshot of my lifeline and some events which have shaped me in my career and in my life. So let's take a look on the container you see on the left side. When I was 4, I moved for 2.5 years to Brazil. A very challenging experience. And as you can see, the list of places where I lived somewhere else is long. But whenever I moved somewhere else and I had to settle in a new situation, it's a big learning. And it's not any more surprising for me or scary. It's more something I need. I need the challenge. I need the change. If we look into nowadays situation from the job perspective, we constantly are facing change or challenges or something someone has never done before. So we just simply need to adapt this. Another thing on this lifetime is the RAM logo you probably see. So I became a cheerleader in Germany in 1992, a sport what was not accepted and totally unknown in Germany. So we will always experience situations where we have an idea, where we focus on something, where our heart is part of, and where we want to find supporters for, where we explain things, where we go the extra mile, where we want to win others for. And if you start something what is totally unknown, you need to be brave. And you probably will find situations in your life where you had to be extremely brave. Maybe it's the first trip you did without your parents, or the first apartment you moved to. So we all have situations where we showed up in a very brave way, and we can reuse this in our professional life if it comes to projects no one has done before. So later on this lifetime curve, you see the logo of the assessment center. A checkpoint I had to go through to be allowed to be a people manager. The preparation for the situation, the self-reflection, the way I got feedback, the way how I worked in the group during the assessment center was the best preparation I could get to be nowadays a people manager, because it always showed me to look at myself first before look on others, to see what I can change, what I can optimize, what I can do differently before asking this at others. So a final note on this is whenever you apply on a role or a new job, look for a job which is a shoe size too big for you. This was once a recommendation of an HR manager I talked to. And it's so true, because in that situation, all these life events come up and you have a high motivation to get into the shoes, you work differently, and you are highly motivated. And now let me talk a little bit about this, how the combination of the lifetime events and the 70-20-10% rule comes together. So these are all topics you see what help you to foster your continuous learning. You need to have the attitude for the thinking, you need to have academic curiosity, and so on. So I touch all of that in an irregular base, and this mixture works for me best. For example, I do have a number of good books, but none of them I read from the first page to the last page. But I make notes, I carry them with me, and I'll revisit the books and the chapters from time to time if in a specific situation. Another thing is I'm extremely interested in digital services. And if it is the app connected meat thermometer for barbecue, but a digital product itself doesn't just show up, it needs to be developed. And quite often digital products do disrupt the business of the company you work for. So I had the interest to understand really how disruptive strategy works. So I focused on this learning academic curiosity and took various courses at HBS, Yale, and lately at MIT to understand really the foundation and to find out how to work best with this. And another thing is, if you want to land the message as a people manager, words are one thing. Sometimes people need picture. I'm definitely a bad drawer. So I took some efforts to start learning drawing to make my message more crisp. So here is a little bit of a snapshot of the books I'm focusing on. And you eventually will notice this picture of myself doing archery at the right bottom. What has this to do with learning, and what does this have to do with a professional life? I'm in sales, so imagine a large deal negotiation there where you need to have a plan, you need to keep calm, you need to adjust if needed, you need to focus on the outcome, you definitely need to breathe, and you need to reflect. The same thing you have to do if you do archery. So this is where things come together.
I love that point. Be flexible, focus, reflect. I think that's great advice. Could you describe an experience on the job learning or a lifetime event that had unexpected benefits or outcomes?
I brought two, and let me talk about one of them. So if you look on the left side, I would like to recall this icon of the ram being a cheerleader, moving to a different country, and doing a training at HBS for disruptive strategy. So this were the connection of lifetime events and a training. It was needed in a project situation where I was running a large IoT, Internet of Things project on HQ level. Everything was new. No one had the idea how to do it. So we needed to be brave, we need to be experimental, we need to be creative. So we were adapting new situations on a global level. But I used the lifetime events, and I used the know-how of the training I gained. So this is one example. There are others. It comes to people management where you can connect. Again, something where you are running to a team, focused on outcome, and bring together maybe what I just finished as MIT Neuroscience for Business to be a good people manager and focus on the success and health of the team. But I would like to do a little exercise with everyone in this audience, and maybe with you, Allison, as well. And I would like that each and every one of you ask your younger you, what is the first memory on an event you learned a lot? Could be anything. And now add one or two live events that you can connect to that. And latest, remember yourself, how different have you managed the situation differently just because you had two events connected to this. Allison, is there something you can share?
Yes, this exercise brings to mind for me a moment of learning. When I was in second grade, I was cast in a local production of South Pacific. And all of my lines were in French. And I didn't have any experience in French. So I had a weekly class with a native French speaker to help me deliver my lines correctly. And I worked very hard. I wanted to do well in the production. And unfortunately, just before the show, my second life event, I caught chickenpox. And because not everyone in the cast had chickenpox, I was not able to perform in the show. But because of that, in the future, any events where I was working hard to learn something, I always remembered this moment where I was so nervous that I wouldn't perform well, but then I was so let down that I wasn't able to perform. And it gave me the confidence and the impetus to go forward and challenge myself just a little bit more.
Great insight. Thanks, Allison, for sharing. But this is definitely about what I was talking, connecting things and going differently into the new situation.
So how much time do you think we should invest in learning on a weekly basis?
the good thing is there's not a strict number of hours I can recommend. The most important thing is we should do it. And we remember every one of us will remember the times during school when we were focusing on an exam, on a test, and we were learning heavily. And 2 weeks later, we couldn't remember what we were learning. So we shouldn't continue doing so. But if we want really to focus on continuous learning, we should revisit learning on a weekly basis by either reading or being part of specific projects or subject matter expert groups where we can challenge ourselves and maybe identify new learning areas. For example, any specific projects I'm working out of my standard role are color-coded in my Outlook calendar. So if I reflect my calendar weeks back, I see weeks where I have not invested a lot in learning and others where I have invested more. So I make it for myself very transparent.
What do you think is the best place for learning?
Make it short and crisp. Any place you feel comfortable, motivated, and relaxed in.
I agree. And then my final question, how often should you review your personal development plan?
This is definitely a big question, and we could probably spend a total additional session on this because doing a development plan is key. Setting development goals is important, but it comes to the situation, do you have a short-term goal, a midterm, or a long-term goal? So I just want to give you something to think about, because a short-term goal is probably something where you can add one action, a follow-up, and you complete this action. A midterm is more like something, is it part of the overall long-term goal, or is it an isolated step, or is it just a milestone to maybe getting to the next position, so maybe the next role? And a long-term goal is something what could have midterm goals in between, but is maybe something in the far future where you should, from my experience, should review it every 4 to 6 months. But as I said, this could definitely be a total different session talking about development plans and development goals and how to achieve them. Cool. So thanks, Allison, for giving me the opportunity to sharing my experience and my approach of lifelong learning. And I understood from when we exchanged first on this topic that you see learning in the workplace as a networking opportunity. Could you tell us a little bit more about this, what this networking opportunity is?
Sure. Dale Carnegie, who is sort of a guru of networking, makes a point in his book that the best way to connect with someone is to ask them a question, ask what they know, find out what they can teach you. If you approach everyone in your environment with the attitude of what do I have to learn from this person, that can make the most powerful connection possible. So I think sometimes we're afraid to ask questions in the workplace. We're afraid to feel like we might be a nuisance, or we might be showing what we don't know, or being vulnerable with our coworkers. But we aren't then thinking about the experience of the person who we're asking. If you're careful to be respectful of your coworkers' time, asking them to share their knowledge is one of the most powerful ways of making a personal connection with them. So for an example, when I was a teaching assistant in a professional certificate in the Swift programming language at the University of Washington, I had a freelancing project that I was working on, and I had a problem with core data, and I just could not get beyond this problem. So finally, I decided I'm going to ask the instructor after class, just like a student. So I went with my project well laid out. I thought, how can I respect his time and get to the problem quickly so he can understand it quickly and help me get over this hurdle? And actually, he didn't know the answer. We were not able to solve the problem together. But months later, he thought about that moment, and he asked me if I was interested in joining his studio. And he said it was because of that moment where I came to him with that question. It really impressed him and put me in his mind when he was looking for people to recommend for a new role at his studio. So in my experience, it really did work directly. Asking a question was a learning opportunity, but it was also a networking opportunity.
Nice. And what do you see as some best practices to follow when preparing learning opportunities for your peers?
There's a lot of research into the most effective ways to prepare learning opportunities and to structure your learning sessions. Without going into a pedagogical seminar, I'll just tell you that the 4 basic ideas are didactic, Socratic, discovery, and inquiry. And didactic is what we think about in learning situations. We think of a person at the chalkboard giving a lecture. All the students in the audience are expected to remember that, repeat it, maybe memorize it for a test. But as you'll see, as we go through these 4 strategies, as the student engagement rises, the instructor engagement falls. So the next form is Socratic questioning. That's where the instructor poses questions and the students answer the questions so that their answers become a sort of text for class discussion. The third is discovery. That's where the teacher will pose a question or a project or a challenge or a problem for the students to resolve. And then the class will work together as a whole, students and teachers, to answer the questions that pop up and find the answer to the challenge. And then the final form is inquiry, and that's where the students themselves pose the question or the challenge. In my experience, the best way to format a session for sharing learning with your peers is a flipped classroom approach, and that makes use of all 4 of these formats. So in the flipped classroom approach, you might give your peers a video to read beforehand or a blog post to read so that they're familiar with the topic. And then when you come together, you pose a question for inquiry, or you have a starter project or some sort of problem for everyone to work on together. And throughout the course of working on the problem together, you're facilitating the exploration and the conversation, posing questions, answering questions. And it's a great enriching experience for everyone and a way to create a hands-on learning environment. Some of the benefits of this, like I said, increased engagement, also team building and collaboration. It can be a great team building exercise. It enables the facilitator to leave the session feeling like they've learned something as well. They're not just up there giving all the facts and not receiving anything in return. And then finally, it normalizes asking questions. But the drawbacks can be that if your audience is looking for more of a didactic approach, they might feel like their investment, their activity is a bit more than they're willing to pay. And you also lose control over the addressed information. You have to be willing to be open to questions you might not have anticipated. And so it's dependent on everyone buying in, everyone participating in the session. But the great benefit of the flipped classroom is that you will leave this learning way more than you ever thought possible.
I haven't heard before about the flipped classroom. I definitely will take some time to look deeper into it because I think it's extremely powerful. But let us discuss a little bit deeper. How do you create opportunities for your coworkers to teach you?
Something that I know is very popular with doctors in residency is something called Journal Club, where they meet up once a week and one doctor presents on an article from a scholarly journal. We have adopted that model at my various workplaces, where we'll meet up once a week to learn something new about Swift development, for example, or different technologies that are available to us as developers. Another thing that you can do in your workplace is adopt a workshop model. In grad school, when I was learning creative writing, we would sit together and we would go over each other's short stories and we would give critical feedback. We do the same thing in code review. We give each other critical feedback, but we don't often think of that as a learning activity. When you're it can be intimidating and embarrassing to write comments on other people's code, but also if you think of it as learning and sharing, and you're really thinking about how to construct the best, most thoughtful feedback, you're learning as you're writing that feedback on each other's code. And that can be a very powerful way to learn in the workplace as well.
Great. But how do you handle resistance to developing learning opportunities in the workplace, or the perception that teaching is a women's work?
I think it's important for us to recognize that it takes a lot of work to develop this much content for meetups and hackathons and journal clubs and other events that you're doing, but also to remember that you're networking while you do it. We have to recognize that teachings and developing trainings is emotional labor. It requires a lot of investment. It requires people to do things that they might not feel comfortable with, like public speaking. But it's also important to recognize that when we organize these trainings, we're contributing beyond our role. We're finding ways that we can step outside of our role and be valuable both to ourselves and to the organization. And you can challenge the stereotype of the female teacher who is standing up there lecturing by avoiding that didactic kind of organization of your sessions, by thinking more of how we can do collaborative learning, how we can use Socratic and inquiry-based methods.
Wonderful. So women's work is extremely important, but on the other side, it takes a lot of effort to prepare. So, how do you overcome the imposter syndrome when leading learning opportunities for your peers?
It can be very intimidating to lead learning opportunities for your peers. I started doing this as a junior developer, and I was leading trainings for colleagues who were at architect level. So often I was the least knowledgeable person in the room. Something that they told me when I was at Florida State is that you have to imagine yourself wearing the coat of your favorite professor. Just fake it until you make it. Pretend that you're that great professor. Get up there and just try your best to facilitate a great session for everyone. Avoid thinking of yourself as the sage on the stage. It's really freeing not to think that you have to have all of the answers, that you're more there to facilitate questions and inquiry. And that's why I'm such a big champion of the flipped classroom model. And finally, it requires a lot of vulnerability and flexibility and a willingness not to have all the answers. And that can be a way of failing forward fast. You can be learning by making mistakes while you're facilitating these trainings. But it's very powerful, especially to admit and to be clear with everyone that you have a lot to learn. One of my favorite past coworkers, his attitude was unfailingly, I still have a lot to learn.
Okay. Unfortunately, Allison, we are coming already to an end of our session. So your final thoughts.
I think it's, I just want to go back and say that I mentioned that organizing these sessions can be a lot of extra work, but you are getting so much benefit out of it by the learning that you take away from it, and also the networking opportunities that you create for yourself and others. So I think it's important for us to think of learning as self-care.
What a great quote to finish today's session, saying learning is self-care. You just can underline this. So thanks everyone for listening. If there are any questions, I think we have 2 minutes left, if I'm correct. Just put them into the Q&A section, and happy to answer them or later on through the platform.